Now I would like to introduce Ray Biggs, our President and CEO. Ray has been West Shore Bank's leader for the past 11 years and has worked in the banking industry for 30 years. Ray has experience in commercial banking and lending with proven skills in acquisition and integration, as well as driving new business development. Ray is currently serving as the chairman of the Michigan Bankers Association Service Corporation Board of Directors and chairman of the Bank Management Committee. He is also currently serving as a director on the Michigan Chamber of Commerce Political Action Board of Directors. Over to you, Ray.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this, this meltdown that is going on throughout Western and Northern Michigan. This is the first of many educational webinars offered by the bank. As a community bank, we're always looking for ways to continue to give back to the areas that we serve. This year, we decided to launch a series of webinars providing information on several topics that we feel will add lots of value to local community leaders, businesses in our communities. In the past, we've done a business seminar where we bring people in for a full day, and we have attorneys and CPAs and various topics reported on. This time, we've decided to do it with a webinar. Most people are up to speed now on either Zoom, WebEx, or Microsoft Teams. So, what a great way to reach out to everybody in a real efficient manner. So we chose today's topic to the heightened risk of cyber attacks related to the pandemic and a remote workforce with phishing attacks have all been intensifying. 95% of the breaches are caused by human error and ransomware. That now accounts for 27% of malware incidents, by the way. So and Eric's going to talk later about what that is, but 86% of breaches are financially motivated. So no organization can afford to ignore the risk. This is it's a serious topic for us. We talk about it daily. We are where the money is. We work with our federal regulators and state regulators all the time in ensuring that we have up-to-date systems and strength of firewalls and capacity to keep our customers' money safe and our money safe for that matter. So I myself have been subject to some identity theft. So I dealt with this years ago, very complicated. It took me 6 months to resolve. As the CEO of a community bank, I had all the resources and availability to resolve it, but it still took me a lot of time to work through. So it's a very personal subject for me to see some of the damage that is done to people and businesses as a result of these breaches. We are pleased to introduce our subject matter expert today, Eric Krohn. Eric is a security awareness advocate at KnowBe4. He's a veteran information security professional with over 20 years experience in medical, aerospace, manufacturing, and defense fields. He is the former security manager for the U.S. Army's 2nd Regional Cyber Center Western Hemisphere and holds many security certifications. Eric works with information security professionals from around the world, providing tools. They also assist us. He'll talk about that later. And training and educational opportunities to succeed in information technology. Off to you, Eric.
All right. Thank you so much, Ray. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the warm introduction. Now, again, we are talking about ransomware today, which is it's just it's a pandemic in and of itself these days. It's gotten so bad with ransomware, and that's because there's so much money at stake here. So before we get into this too much, I want everyone to understand it doesn't matter whether you're a large Fortune 50 organization or a smaller, small, medium-sized business, or even individuals. Ransomware has been hitting people and organizations of all sizes for quite some time now. It's a very expensive and problematic type of malware, actually, because it can cause a couple of different things. Not only can you not get to the things you need to do to accomplish your work every day, but lately they've actually been moving into data exfiltration, which causes a data breach. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But ransomware is one of these things that really does apply to pretty much everybody out there. And that's why I wanted to, or I love to do this talk on ransomware, so people better understand what it is. I find that a lot of people have read about it in the news. but they don't really understand what it means. So that's what we're going to try to get through today, and hopefully it will help you. Remember to enter your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to those at the end of the talk here. So having said that, let's go ahead and get moving here. My background, you heard a little bit about me. I've been in IT and security in different areas since about the mid-1990s. So I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in manufacturing, I've worked as part of what's called an MSP or managed service provider, and I've worked a lot in DoD for about 10 years. So I've seen a lot of different things go on. I've seen malware grow from annoying little things that just kind of emailed themselves to other people, and it was basically spamming other people, to what we're dealing with today, which is very significant. And with ransomware, it's actually been attributed to loss of life, which is a pretty scary thing. So in Germany, there was a hospital that was taken down by ransomware, and a person needed emergency assistance. Well, since the hospital was down, they had to reroute the ambulance to another place about 20 minutes away, and the individual passed away during that. So there's some significant ramifications to this. And again, now it's been attributed to loss of life, not just monetary loss or information loss. So we'll talk about some of that stuff here. Now, again, I work for KnowBe4, and what KnowBe4 does is we have a security awareness training and simulated phishing platform. We focus very, very much on the individuals and the human side of cybersecurity. There's technology, there's all of that stuff that's wonderful, but a big gaping hole in a lot of security plans is the human element. And so that's really what we focus on. It's about that. We do have a really nice little compliance tool as well called KCM, the KnowBe4 Compliance Manager. But our main focus, the thing that has made us one of the largest in the world, is our security awareness training and simulated phishing. So we'll talk about how that works. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about an overview of modern ransomware. We're going to talk about the current attack landscape, monetizing the attacks, and defending ourselves. Again, please get those questions in if you have anything, and we'll deal with them at the end. Let's start off with an overview of modern ransomware. And this is kind of our situation report through 2020. 2021 is shaping up to be very much the same way. And that is, as security professionals, the world is kind of on fire around us. Now, all through 2020, we had the pandemic going on, and ransomware and malware attacks, cybercrime spiked considerably during that time. So this is what it looks like when we look back at 2020. And again, I don't think 2021 is going to be any different. Unfortunately, we've kind of become used to data breaches and things like that. If you remember back, maybe some of the big ones that first hit the news was back with like Home Depot breach, or the Target breach was probably one of the more popular ones, at least in my mind. And back then we all went, oh my gosh, this is horrible. It's a terrible thing. All this stuff lost. We thought it was a really big deal. And anymore, that's just become one of those, yeah, okay, they got breached too. And that's kind of, it's sad, but it is the world we live in. All this stuff is going on around us. And we just have to accept this is the world that we live in right now. Now, that doesn't mean we give up. We have to try to fix this. But unfortunately, we're kind of not necessarily on the winning side all the time right now. But hopefully that'll change. Now, with ransomware, it has been growing, and I'll throw some numbers and stuff out there pretty soon about that. But ransomware actually started out ages ago. And I think this is fascinating. Not a lot of people realize this. But actually, ransomware started out back in 1989. And it was a strain of ransomware called the AIDS ransomware. Now, this was interesting because it was actually put together by a doctor, a medical doctor, who attended an AIDS research symposium, I suppose it was. And when he was there, he handed out floppy disks. And these floppy disks were for a program that was, I believe, difficult to get at the time. So people took it back, they put it in their computers, and after 90 reboots, after they ran this, the machine would reboot 90 times, and it kept track of that. And after the 90th reboot, it would encrypt all the file names for on that hard drive. So all of a sudden, you lose the ability to get to anything. Now, you had to send like it was $189 to a PO box in Panama, right? So I'm guessing it was either cash or cashier's check or whatever, right? But he had to send money to a PO box in Panama. So one thing led to another. The doctor actually was busted. They did arrest him, I believe, in the UK. And what he said was that he didn't feel like he was doing anything wrong because all the money that he was gathering from this particular scam was going towards AIDS research. Now, we didn't hear much about ransomware for a long time after this because, well, frankly, it was too easy to get caught. So let's understand that typically speaking, in a ransom situation, whether it's a human or property or something like that, where somebody has something they're holding it for ransom, the riskiest time is at the transfer of money and whatever it is that you're doing there. So whether it's a person or whether it's materials, that transfer of money for the product is where people tend to get in trouble. And we've all seen this in the movies where the FBI swoops in and grabs the people, right? So it was very, very risky. But earlier, not too long ago, we had this wonderful thing called cryptocurrency pop up. And cryptocurrency is, I don't want to say it's untraceable, but it is much more anonymous than other types of currency in a lot of ways. It's unregulated in a lot of ways. And so this has actually opened the door for them. And some enterprising criminals said, hey, wait a minute. Now we can do stuff and not worry about getting busted for it. And so they started using cryptocurrency. And there's lots of arguments about whether cryptocurrency, caused ransomware or the other way around. I will say I believe it's an enabler for it. But there are legitimate uses for cryptocurrency these days as well. So what happened is once they realized they could do that, they started saying, hey, let's take the same kind of encryption that people use to keep their data safe from us, and let's apply it to the data they need to do their jobs or their business needs to succeed. And that's what they did. They started taking that encryption. They would get into these systems and then they would encrypt all of this data. And then they require you to send them money to get a decryption key or something along those ways. And it's been remarkably effective, like I said. Now, this has gone on for a number of years, and it started off with fairly low ransoms. I'll talk about some of the numbers here in a minute, but it's grown significantly. And one of the things that happened is organizations got pretty good at taking their backups and restoring fairly quickly. This was the kind of kryptonite to paying the ransom. Because if you could get your data back online very quickly and get your business running again, they really lost all of their leverage to make you pay for it. Well, a number of years back in San Francisco, I believe it was the Bay Area Municipal Transport Agency, they got hit with ransomware and it shut down all of the municipal transport, so the light rail and all that stuff throughout San Francisco. And it popped up on all the screens. It did all that. They had to actually open the gates to let people ride the trains for free because they couldn't sell tickets because they were hit, right? So it went a couple of days like that. And the attackers found out that the transportation authority said, yeah, we're not paying the ransom. And they started restoring the machines. So this group came back and they said, hey, while we were in there, we also grabbed some data. And if you don't pay the ransom, we're going to dump it out on the internet and you're going to have to deal with the data breach. Now, they turned around and they said, no, you didn't. And they called their bluff, which was fantastic. And they continued the restoration and nothing else happened. I believe this was in 2016 when we heard of that. Now, that was a threat, but it was an empty threat. However, what happened late in 2019 was the attackers made that threat real. So they got kind of tired of not having the money, of them restoring the stuff without having to pay the ransoms. So they figured out that, hey, you know what? Maybe it is a good idea if we go ahead and extract all of this data first. So what they do now is, in many, many cases, this started with the Maze ransomware, which is actually, they retired, and a group called Gregor took over for that. But the Maze ransomware group is the one that started it. And what they did is when they get into the system, before they launch the ransomware, they exfiltrate a bunch of data. In other words, they take a bunch of important sensitive data out of the network and move it out, and they've dumped it on the internet. So what they do is they say, if you don't pay the ransom, we're going to dump this publicly. Now, if the organization doesn't pay the ransom, yes, it does get dumped. The problem is even if they do pay the ransom and they go, yeah, trust us, we deleted it now. We're dealing with the same criminals that just took your organization hostage, right? We know that's not actually going to happen. The data ends up getting sold on the dark web or places like that. We've even seen where recently a group, the company had paid for the data to be destroyed. They said, we destroyed the data. And then they turned back and around and said, oh, and now we also have this extra group of data too that you'll have to pay for as well. So they're trying all kinds of crazy things to get payments out of people. But this was a game changer in the ransomware game, because no longer was it just about restoring the data. Now we have to stop it, because even if they don't dump it on the web, you're dealing with a data breach. So we have to be proactive and stop it before it happens, as opposed to just reacting and restoring the machines, which is the mindset that a lot of places got into. So it's really changed the game on how ransomware works. This also affects things such as cyber insurance. So if you have an insurance policy that you know will cover a ransomware event, in other words, having the digital forensics done and those sorts of things, you figure out how much you need to cover that sort of thing. Well, typically speaking, these don't also cover the costs associated with the data breach side, which can be just as costly. So it's caught some people off guard when it comes to making those cyber insurance claims. So this is how the game has really, really changed in the last couple of years. And now most of the strains that I see out there are ones that exfiltrate data. Also, the things that you see in the news, the things you see about organizations getting hit with ransomware is almost always the issue is the data that got moved out, not that their production lines or their operations were stopped. There's a few exceptions, but almost all of them, the big issue is the amount of data that got pulled out of those networks. So it's really been a game changer, like I said. Now, the current attack landscape, COVID has not slowed people down at all. As a matter of fact, we've seen a lot of different reports of large jumps in cybercrime during COVID. So the two top ways that ransomware gets spread is through phishing emails and through remote access. In other words, a lot of times it's called RDP, which is Remote Desktop Protocol. It's built into Windows. It's very easy to deploy. And what happened is a lot of people used it when it was time to, work from home. That was a very, very quick thing that happened. They said, okay, nobody can come into the office anymore. Everybody needs to work from home. And what they did is they took their machines in the office many times. They turned on Remote Desktop Protocol and forwarded things to them. So now the people from home can actually control their machines in the office, which sounds like a great idea. The problem is it's not done very securely pretty often. Like more often than not, it's not secured. So if you've ever logged into a screen that looks kind of like this, you've used Remote Desktop Protocol. Now, there are websites out there that search for this sort of stuff, and they're very, very good, even if we're trying to be clever and make it not look like it's that. Things like Shodan.io is a website that you can find these very easily, and attackers use that to start laying out these attacks. So again, the number one and number two ways that this is happening are phishing and things like Remote Desktop Protocol. Now, we saw a huge jump in the way that things happened back when COVID first came out. This is a chart of the new phishing templates that we saw. So a lot of times these attackers, they like things that are easy. They want to keep it simple. And so they reuse things a lot. They just reuse the same thing over and over again. They may repurpose what the link does or where it goes. It may go to a login page instead of somewhere to download a document, but it's the same template. Well, what we saw was this jump. So it was March 8th through the 14th that week. We saw 16 brand new phishing templates related to COVID-19. And that's a pretty good number of brand new phishing templates about a perfect, about a single subject in and of itself. The next week, it was 36 of them. And the week after that, from March 22nd through the 28th, was 94 brand new phishing templates around COVID. So you can see this did a huge number of new attacks that they were using. Now, phishing attacks are largely emotional attacks. We don't necessarily think about that, but they are. So phishing attacks use psychology a lot. And what they do is they try to drive us into a state of being concerned or agitated. And in those states, we tend not to make the best decisions. So COVID was a very stressful time. If you remember back in the beginning of this, people all of a sudden had to work from home. We didn't know what it really meant for organizations, what was required, what the government requirements were going to be, how this was going to work out. And you couldn't even get toilet paper, right? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that just had people on the edge and completely stressed out. This is an opportune time for attackers to now go after people because they're already in that heightened emotional state. So this is a reflection of what we saw there. Now, it was interesting. During this time, Google said they were blocking 18 million COVID-related spam and phishing emails every day. That was of their 100 million that they were blocking. So they block 100 million phishing emails a day, which is mind-boggling. But 18% of those were related directly to COVID-19. So we've seen this kind of keep going. And one of the other changes they've done is they've been targeting what's called MSPs or MSSPs, so managed service providers. If you have a small organization and you basically outsource a lot of your IT to another place to come in and they take care of things because maybe you're not big enough to require a full-time IT guy or a security guy on staff all the time. We all know that security can get very expensive, so you use an organization like this. And it's a great business model. I actually really like the business model because it allows smaller organizations to be able to get the kinds of services they otherwise couldn't afford. The problem is the attackers have realized that if they go after these folks, because these folks now have access to all of your machines in your network, all they have to do is get one of those folks to be compromised, and now they can attack all their customers. So we're seeing that over and over again where organizations are being hit by that. One of the groups, they ended up, one of the MSPs ended up paying ransoms for 70% of their customers that got hit with this because they also managed their backups, which the criminals were able to encrypt as well. So they weren't able to restore. So they ended up paying 70% of it. The 30% they didn't pay were folks that also had an off-site backup for their data. Now, in this case, I don't believe there was data exfiltration, which is fantastic, but it was still very, very rough for these people. So you need to understand if you're using an MSP or an MSSP, you really need to ask them what they're doing to protect you in case something happens to them. This is supply chain problems that we see over and over again. So make sure that you ask them those questions. What are you doing to protect me? And hopefully they'll answer things like multi-factor authentication. In other words, it's more than just a username or password to log into your equipment. There's going to be something else involved and things like that. So I want to show you real quick an anatomy of a ransomware attack, sort of. Now I put that disclaimer in there because this is just a general overview of how these things happen. There are different specifics that happen in these, but it's important to kind of understand the process. So basically what happens is you have the internet there. You can tell because those computers are all tied together by tubes. And the person is over there, you know, they're just doing their thing. They're doing their internet sort of thing. And they're on the web, they click on something, let's say. And now what it's going to do is it's going to reach out and it's going to either download the attachment, or the attachment may be in the email, or it's going to take them to a website, okay? It is now going to download what's called a dropper on number 3. Now, what people don't understand is when you get an infected document, the document doesn't actually contain the ransomware. It's going to contain a smaller program that is then going to reach out for directions and download the ransomware in the next step, okay? So that's where the dropper reaches out and it actually downloads the malware. That's in step 4 right there. Step 5 is where the malware gets downloaded. Now, here's what's important. When we see this, we see a lot of times it's not just the ransomware that gets downloaded, but it may be a remote access Trojan. It may be banking Trojans that are looking to skim credentials when you go to banking sites. We see all kinds of other malware that gets downloaded along with the ransomware, because if they can get the ransomware on your system, they can get just about anything they want. So it's important to understand this. And what's also important to understand is there's a lot of back and forth traffic. Like here in step 6, essentially we have the data being exfiltrated, and this step is usually what happens. So they move the data out to where the bad guys want it on those that do that. Otherwise, they communicate with what's called the command and control servers. These have the encryption keys, and they give the attackers the ability to turn around and decrypt the data later. So that kind of traffic has to happen. Then the encryption starts. Once that thing pops up on your screen, everything is done with. All of that stuff is done, and it is too late to actually do anything about it. And that causes all kinds of problems. The important thing to understand here is there is a lot of back and forth traffic that happens going out to the internet, not just that thing that you downloaded in the document. Now, that's important when we want to look at how we're going to defend against that when we're looking at traffic leaving our network as well as stuff coming in. So I'll mention that a little bit more when we talk in a moment. Now, again, COVID-19, we're seeing it's not slowing down. Foxconn got hit, all of these different groups. Look at Foxconn here in Mexico. They got hit with Doppelpaymer. It's a $34 million ransom demand. Now, Foxconn is a big electronics manufacturer, but we've seen it in all kinds of different ways. Defense contractors, hospitals, pharmaceutical groups, over and over again. And some of the different types here, this was an interesting one. This was called Crycryptor. Now, this posed as a Canadian COVID-19 tracing app. So the Canadian government basically came out and said, we're going to do COVID-19 tracing. This is how this is going to look. And they didn't give a whole lot more info. So the bad guys turned around and said, hey, we're going to set up these websites that say this is the COVID app. And they started sending that around to people to download on their Android phones. So these people would install it, boom, it was ransomware. It would lock down their stuff. And now they either had to pay, or fortunately, the group called ESET, which is an antivirus provider, found a decryptor for that, and they found out how you could do it. But this is an example of the fact that A, mobile devices can also be targeted, and B, how they use that kind of COVID-based sorts of predicaments to get people to download. So we also saw the Evil Corp and Wasted Locker. This was a big one here. They went quiet for a while, kind of popped back up, and they did some pretty ugly stuff. The code was completely rewritten during this time, and it's pretty brutal. So they go after specifically high value targets, and their demands are also in the millions of dollars. We saw some issues with DraftKings and SB Tech. This is a group that does offline betting, or online betting rather. These folks got hit, and it came out during the SEC filing when they were looking at doing some mergers here that there was a ransomware issue. And the result of that was they had to create a $30 million emergency fund to cover future costs and litigations from the attacks. So this can even handle, or these can even impact M&A types of stuff as well. And then finally, unfortunately here, we saw this, the Red Cross and Cyber Peace Institute. It got so bad with hospitals that they put out a joint sort of deal that said, please stop attacking us. This is bad. We're hospitals. We're trying to do this. And there were some cyber gangs in the beginning that said, we won't attack hospitals. If we hit a hospital, we will provide the decryption for free. Sorry about that. Unfortunately, even if they didn't attack, there were other groups that stepped right in and took it over. So, and then we also saw this one. This was a big one. Grubmanshire, all this. They lost 750 gigs worth of data. This was a law firm out of New York that handled a lot of the Hollywood celebrities. They lost an awful lot of data, and the ransom demand was up to $42 million to not release these contracts and all this stuff that belonged to these Hollywood celebrities. They even claimed Donald Trump at the time. But this is an example of a law firm getting hurt. It doesn't really matter. This data is monetized in a lot of different ways. So speaking about monetizing, average cost of a ransomware attack, $133,000. Now that's the cost of the ransomware attack. And I'll point that out in just a second here. 75% of companies infected had up-to-date endpoint protection, so their antivirus was up to date. And ironically, these specs are from Sophos and Kaspersky, who do endpoint protection as well. I use Sophos on my machine, and they did this. So 75% though, what this is saying is you can't rely on just endpoint protection. Now, 34% of businesses went a week or more without access to their data. Now, Group IB did a study in 2018 to 19. It went from $6,000 to $84,000 for the average ransom. And then Coveware looked at it first quarter of 2020, it was $11,605. And finally, Sophos came in and said, you know what? If you pay the ransom, it more than doubles the cost. Well, you had that roughly $133,000 in mitigation costs to begin with, and now you add paying another $110,000 worth of ransom on top of it. it really starts getting expensive. So I get questions, why are these so hard to stop? Well, they use groups from the outside that target people and recruit people. So this guy, his name is Monfa. He's actually from the business email compromise side, but it's a similar tactic. So you'll see here, this post has been made for everyone who feels low about themselves, to those who have been told they'll never amount to anything. This is a recruiting tactic to take people that feel like they're held down and bring them into the system, and they start using them to create attacks. It's a very mafia type look, and they use this in the ransomware gangs as well. So what this does is this insulates the top levels because they're not actually doing the criminal actions like sending the emails and things like that. They also take advantage of something called ransomware as a service, which is basically a sharing model for attackers. So the malware, the ransomware people who actually design the ransomware, they sit up there and they create all this stuff, and they handle the back end, they do all that kind of stuff. And then they have people that go out, and it costs them in a lot of cases nothing to get the ransomware. And then they do a profit share with these attackers. So they get 70%. The attackers get 70% of the profits. The malware developer only gets 30%, but they've got all of these people that are feeding in this money, and they don't have to take the time now to put the attacks together. So this has brought in a whole new group of people that wasn't very technical, not technical enough to create ransomware, that now do these attacks for them. So it's gotten uglier before it's gotten better. Now, defending ourselves, we've heard all the scary stuff, and this is this gets pretty interesting in here. The thing is, like I mentioned earlier, everything seems to be on fire. So do we settle in for the show and just kind of watch the dumpster fire happen? And I'm hoping that's not the case, although sometimes it does get very, very frustrating. We need to continue to fight the good fight, and we will get ahead of this. But like in so many other ways of cybercrime, there's some specific things we need to do. One of those is we need to take this seriously. So if you're not preparing for a ransomware attack, you're heading down a very ugly road fast. You need to have this built into what you're doing and your business continuity plans, your disaster recovery plans. You need to dedicate time to dealing with ransomware. I've seen in the past where people or organizations kind of consider ransomware the same as they do any kind of malware or virus, but it's such a different beast that it needs to be separated out. It's very, very important that you have your own plans on how to deal with this. Furthermore, within that, you need to understand the differences between ones that exfiltrate data and ones that do not, because you're going to need a different plan that's going to involve PR and lots of other stuff that's just like having a data breach, a normal data breach. You're going to have that if it exfiltrates data. You may not have to have that if it's just ransomware, if it's just kind of knocks some of your systems offline. So it's important to have that well thought out. And unfortunately, I see a lot of organizations that go through this end up not thinking that part through, and that's where it goes kind of badly for them. So the steps that we do now, this comes from my years of experience doing this and my military background. It's a layered defense. If there was a silver bullet that could stop all of this stuff, I wouldn't have a job, and neither would a whole lot of other people out there. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. There's no one thing that's going to stop this. So just like in any other business decisions, you need to weigh risk with cost, and you need to see how much risk are we willing to knock this down compared to the cost. Okay. So what I like to tell people is, you're never going to reach 0% risk on this without spending a ton. It's kind of like if you have systems that need to stay online, you got 4 5s of availability, 99 point, and then 4 5s. That is one cost. But if you do another 5, so 99.55s worth of availability, in other words, it's online all that much time, the cost between those two is significant. For some organizations, it's not worth the difference in cost, so you accept that risk of that extra time out. Now, the same thing has to be thought of when you're looking at the controls that you have placed in your organization. So again, nothing's ever going to be 100%, and there will be a time where within your own organization the costs are going to outweigh the merit of what you have. So you can take your residual risk, whatever's left over, that maybe, you know, there's a 0.2% chance that something will get you, and you can insure against that, or you can just accept the risk. There's lots of ways to do that, but it's important to understand that none of these will ever get to zero. So the first one, and the most important one I like to say, is training and awareness. And I'm not just saying that because I work for a training company. I work for a training company because I honestly believe this. The people are the targets that kicks off so many bad things with cybercrime, from business email compromise scams, from all of that stuff, all the way up to ransomware and worse. All right. And so you have to have that in there. And I'm going to go deeper into this because I do find that this is the area that a lot of people, they don't understand the reality of, and it's very uncomfortable for people, especially people like me. I'm a techno geek, right? I have lots of computers running around me. I have never been happier than when I'm sitting in a server room by myself with a keyboard banging away at the keys, right? I love technology. What that means is a lot of us that are technology focused, we may be slightly introverted, and we're not always comfortable with attacking the human side of things. It's a very, very uncomfortable thing for a lot of us. So we're going to talk about that and how to deal with that and some of the steps to deal with that here real quick. But the next step is email and spam gateways. Email and spam gateways are, like I mentioned, Google was blocking 100 million per day. 18 million of those were COVID related. Well, the fact is, even the best in these products still ends up passing, you know, anywhere from 5 to 15% of the scam emails or the phishing emails. And the reason for this is if you tighten them down too much, you start rejecting real emails, and that starts impacting business. So they're good, they're needed because the sheer volume of stuff out there is unbelievable. When I looked on the dark web last, it was $65 for me to send 50,000 phishing emails through a service. So the barrier to entry here is very, very low. The cost is almost nothing. And that's why there are just billions of these things that go out a day. So you need these to just reduce the sheer amount of volume that ends up in people's inboxes. Unfortunately, what happens is the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that's easier to spot, is the stuff that gets blocked, and the good stuff is actually the stuff that makes it through. That's why it's important, again, to have the humans be able to make that decision. One of the concepts I want to get across here really quick is that the human portion is the portion where we flip from being proactive to reactive. So we put up these email gateways, we do all that stuff to keep it from getting to the user. Once the user opens that infected document or clicks that link or does their action, now we're going to have to react to that. We're hoping our endpoint protection or, you know, antivirus catches it. We're hoping data loss prevention software keeps the data from going out, and we're hoping our backups work well. So these are important things to understand, as that's where it flips. So we need to shut down RDP to the internet, or at the very least, we need to secure it as well as we can. That means good logging, maybe even put a VPN in front of it, and really look at how to lock down RDP, since that's the number 2 way this happens. Data loss prevention is the stuff that will catch all of that data from moving out of your network, and may even catch those different connections where it's trying to download the actual malware. If you can break that loop right there, it's not going to happen. So data loss prevention is key. And then weapons grade backups. That means having them off site. That means not having them on a network share, because ransomware will encrypt backups. It will actually target backups so that you don't have something to restore from. So talking about the human side, we have to understand some things. Our brains, they actually filter things. And this is, you know, the root of deception is our brains and how we can mess with these filters. So this is important because they have all these tactics and techniques. And again, one of the key ones is emotions. That if you've ever been very mad or upset, it's very hard to make critical thinking decisions, right? That's an important thing here. And this is what they rely on. This is why they threaten you with being arrested. This is why it's got to happen right now or else. That's why all these things happen, because they push us into a way of thinking where it's very hard for us to think critically and notice the bad things that are going on there. So when it comes to these reality things, there's actually a great show out there. It's called Brain Games. I think it's on Hulu. And it opens your eyes to some amazing things where our brain is filtering stuff going on around us. It is really an amazing show if you're interested in this kind of psychology stuff. But it's important to know this because our reality can be kind of twisted and tricked, right? And some of the things that, happen with the filtering, for example, if you've ever seen these pictures, allegedly there's a shark in here. I still don't see it. This is called an autostereogram. You kind of cross your eyes for a while, and eventually this 3D image pops out, right? I know I'm not the only one that remembers this. Now, what's important about this is once you've seen that 3D image, when you come back and look at it again, the ability to spot that again is extremely, it's much faster. You see it the second time much faster. And why is that? Because your brain is already knows what it's looking for, and it filters out all of the noise, and boom, you see it much faster. This is because, again, your brain knows what to do. Well, there's other things in our lives that affect our brains and build those same kind of filters for situations that we're in, for all kinds of stuff like that. Now, humans are vulnerable, and this is a key here. I love this. This is from Mr. Robot. I've never found it hard to hack most people. If you listen to them, watch them, their vulnerabilities are like a neon sign screwed into their heads. And these vulnerabilities he's talking about are things like how we deal with aggressive people, okay? So when somebody is aggressive with you, do you back away or do you get back in their face, okay? That is actually a vulnerability, either way. And the attackers know how to deal with that. If they know that they can push you around, they're going to get aggressive with you and make you make mistakes by pushing you around. Likewise, if you're pushing back on them, they know that you're becoming angry, and that is going to cloud your judgment when it comes time to do things. And they can actually and do kind of twist what they're going to have you do based on your reactions. There's lots of different things that we have that are vulnerabilities like this. So greed is one of them. The Nigerian prince scam we've all heard of. He's been trying to give away money for years. There's curiosity. If you've seen those ads that are on like the news channels all the time now, online, like on all the different news channels, it's the top 5 things that blah 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 blah. Number 4 will blow your mind. Okay, this kind of stuff makes you curious, and there's psychology behind that. It's called the information gap theory. And it actually makes you want to do that because you're being deprived of the answer. So it's actually very powerful in the human psyche, especially now that we're used to picking up cell phones and getting the answer to things almost immediately, as opposed to when I was a kid, when we had to get on this thing called a bus and go to a place called a library and look up the answers. We were used to waiting, but now not so much. We're used to it being almost immediate. So then there's self-interest, things that are good for you. Now, urgency and fear are 2 very powerful ones. And it's why you don't very often see phishing emails that aren't on a time frame. This is the IRS. Need you to send us iTunes gift cards by the end of my shift, or you're being arrested. Okay, so there's the urgency. There's the fear of being arrested, and all of these are designed to make you not realize that the IRS probably does not take iTunes gift cards, right? Your focus is off of the gift cards and on the fact that apparently the IRS is going to arrest you if you don't do something in the next few hours because you owe them money. That's where the urgency and fear pieces come together. We see it in business email compromise too, where it's an executive that ends up sending an email to somebody. This is also called CEO fraud. They say they're a CEO or an executive. They send an email to someone in finance and say something like, I need you to transfer this money right away. Sometimes it starts off with an easy email that starts off along the lines of, hey, did you get my previous message? And that person looks through their emails and they reply, sir, ma'am, I'm sorry, I didn't get that message. And then the quote unquote CEO replies to them and says, I sent you something this morning. I told you we needed to get this money transferred. We're doing an acquisition. We're doing whatever. There's a story behind it always. I'm going to have to go back in here and fix your mess up. You better have that money transferred before I talk to you again. So it goes from just, hey, did you get my earlier message, to a lot of pressure on these people almost immediately, using the authority of the CEO to get this stuff done, right? Very, very powerful way to influence people. And then they're just scared. They don't think about the things that they should be looking for. And then, of course, helpfulness. We've had these storms. Every time there's a natural disaster, a man-made, there are people out there trying to raise money in fake GoFundMes or other scams like that. So these are kind of the lures. These are the things that they use, the strings that they use to make us do what they want. Now, when it comes to training, it is effective, very effective. This is 4 million users that we did this across. The average click rate for the baseline was 37.9%. Now, I don't think I have to tell you that if you think about people clicking on phishing emails, almost 38% of the time there's a problem. And I will tell you, I swear this personally, these numbers are not inflated. I've seen so much worse than this actually out there in a lot of cases. I've actually seen where we've done this baseline, which we can do for free for organizations. We'll do it for free, no obligation, no nothing. It just kind of opens your eyes. But I've seen it to the point where they came back and said, yeah, we'd like to stop doing this now because the number is so bad we get the point. And that's a scary thing. Now, by training these people and by starting to do simulated phishing attacks, within 3 months, it dropped down to 14.1%. And then at the end of a year, they were down to 4.7%. Now, some people say, well, if it's not 0%, it's not worth using. Remember what I said, there will never be 0%. But there's a huge difference between 38% click rates and 4.7 or lower percent click rates. It is a huge, huge difference. And you see that change happen pretty quickly. Again, this is 4 million users tracked over the course of a year. So big difference here. Now, the trick is it's not that hard, but it does take some actual planning. These are the 4 steps we use. Get a baseline test. Again, we can do that for free, no problem. You train the users first. Teach them about phishing. Teach them about handling passwords instead of reusing them across multiple sites. You got to teach them how to do this. Now, I recommend you don't give them a really long one once a year. Break it down into shorter sessions, maybe 30 minutes once a year and maybe 15 minutes every quarter, or if you can even do it 5 minutes every month. And make it relevant. Make it something like, we know it's the first quarter, there's going to be tax stuff. Why not tell people, hey, look out for these scams. These are going to be coming in to try to impact you. And they're learning how to protect the organization while it's relevant to them too. So then you do the simulated phishing. And the simulated phishing is not about tricking people. This is a big misconception. The simulated phishing is about taking what they learned in training and being able to exercise that in a fail-safe environment. In other words, it's kind of like you go to a course and you get the instructor-led piece and then you do the lab, right? You learn, I learn a lot more from the lab than I do just hearing someone say it. And this is kind of the same thing. So we teach them how to spot these, and then we give them things to practice on. And we give it to them regularly. We found at least once a month is where you want to be. And the folks will always be looking for it then. It keeps it fresh in their mind. Oh, I wonder if this is one of those. So they're keeping that eye open. Now, the other thing that's important is the messaging that goes behind the phishing. Again, we need to let them know why we're doing it and that it's not about doing the bad thing. Now, we also want to look at the results. And when we see the results, then we want to turn around, and as they get down to 0, and it very often will get to 0, we have to make them a little tougher. And that's where we keep bumping it up a little bit. So we start off easier so they get some good experience in there and they're feeling good about it. And then you come out to them and you say, hey, y'all are doing so good, we need to make them a little tougher. And then you up the difficulty level a little bit, but it makes them feel good as well. So it just kind of runs that cycle. I see a lot of organizations do the middle 2 things, but they don't do the baseline and they don't look at the results. Now, if you don't know where you're coming from, you don't know where to get, how to get to where you're going. And if you don't look at the results, you may miss that your particular group of people is very prone to clicking on things related to a certain type. They're very prone to CEO type frauds or to entering credentials in places. You want to use that to then train them on the things that they are most vulnerable to. Now, almost done with the slides here. This is a document I love, partially because I had a part in writing it, not gonna lie, but I think it's great. This is the Ransomware Hostage Rescue Manual. On that link there, it's free. It's designed to give you things before, during, and after a ransomware attack that you can work on. This is kind of that cheat sheet when everything's going all crazy and there's pressure. You have this to look at and it helps you kind of decide, okay. But again, there's checklists, things to do before, things to do after. It's a fantastic resource for ransomware attacks. So having said that, thank you very much. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's my Twitter handle there, or email me. I'm absolutely thrilled to just speak to anyone at any point in time about this. Hopefully we have some questions here. If we don't, then again, reach out to me at any time.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. This is unbelievably critical information in a year where we've all grown so much more electronically independent than or dependent, I should say, than we ever thought we'd be. So thank you so much for your time today, and the presentation was fantastic. My name's Sid Van Slyke. I'm a senior vice president and the market leader in Traverse City for the bank. And we appreciate everybody joining us today. I want to remind you, if you do have a specific question, I answered one already in the Q&A. Please enter those questions there, and I will report those to Eric here momentarily, but I want to let everybody know, so you're not feverishly scribbling notes, you are going to have access to the presentation. It will be recorded both live and the slides as well. Also want to let folks know that every attendee has been entered to win a 1-year subscription to Know Before Security Awareness Training Program. It's a $2,500 value. I think Eric has left us all sufficiently terrified, so the winner will feel very blessed to have that benefit today. I do see a question has come in. How can I get a baseline, Eric?
Yep. If you just go to knowbefore.com, right on the page there, you'll be able to find a place to get a baseline. I'll grab that URL real quick while we're doing this. But it's very easy to do. Otherwise, the other thing is you can reach out to me at the erickk@knowbefore.com, and I'll get you set up for that. But it should be pretty prominent on our website on how to get the free baseline. We try not to hide that. We actually try to make it easy for people, mostly because we find that people underestimate how they're going to do. I've seen a lot of people come in and go, "Oh, you'll never get me. Let's see what happens." And they walk away going, "Huh, that was interesting."
Right. Well, we appreciate you making that available. And I see another one coming in. It's talking about and I would agree, sometimes these cyber attacks seem to ebb and flow. Do you see ransomware attacks slowing down in the next couple of years, or is it kind of a coming and going type of event in your opinion?
You know, there for a while, it slowed down a little bit back in like early 2019. And I thought that we were finally getting ahead of it when we were getting the backups working well. I thought we were getting ahead of it. And the other thing that happened is cryptocurrency started gaining steam, and the attackers turned to putting something called cryptojacking software on machines a lot more often. So what this basically did is they would infiltrate your network, and they would use your hardware to do this cryptocurrency stuff and generate Bitcoin and all that, leaving you with the power bill and some very slow machines. So that went on for a little while. But then the cryptocurrency market has been so up and down. It kind of went down for a little bit, and they turned right back around to the ransomware thing because they figured out they were making more money there. And then in like I said, in late 2019, when they started exfiltrating data, that was a huge game changer. So the only way we're going to see this go away is by making it where it's not profitable for them to do it. And frankly, right now it is so profitable for them to do it. Like I mentioned, the barrier of entry, it costs these people $0 to get the actual malware. It costs them $65 to send an email to 50,000 people, and they get 70% of the profit. If they hit one person out of that 50,000 people, they're way ahead in the game. So until some of that stuff gets dealt with, it's going to be with us.
Yeah, I would agree. And another question, are we just as susceptible to this on our mobile devices? An Android or Apple product, is one safer than the other?
Yeah, I mentioned that one strain that they did, Crycryptor, that was focused on that. We have seen it on Macs. So a lot of people are still under the misinterpretation or misunderstanding that if they run a Mac device or an Apple device of some sort, that it's not susceptible to viruses, including ransomware. And that's absolutely wrong. There have been some that have focused directly on Apple hardware because there's a lot of people that use it now. And it used to be a case where the criminals got more out of attacking Windows machines because the amount of them that was out there was so much higher than what you saw on the Mac devices. But now that everybody's using tablets and iPads for things and MacBooks and all of that stuff, they've actually started to get to where they've accelerated hugely, and it's just as dangerous either way.
It's funny you say that. I remember buying the early Apple products and being sold them as kind of virus proof.
Yeah.
At the time.
Yeah, that doesn't work anymore.
Certainly not the case anymore. Well, I appreciate it. I want to remind everybody, you've all been entered to win a $2,500 annual subscription, and we'll be in touch with the winner of that later today. We're also going to ask that when the webinar ends, if you would take just a couple minutes to complete the short survey at the end. We're endeavoring on these events to make sure they're of value to you, and we want to make sure that we're covering topics that are pertinent to our clients and friends of the bank, and that we can continue to bring experts like Eric on for you in the year where it's not so easy to get together. The good news is, rather than doing this in Ludington or in Traverse City, we can bring this kind of market-wide to our clients and friends of the bank. So please take the survey so we know we're meeting your needs and wishes. We appreciate that extra couple of minutes. And with that, I just want to thank everyone who took the time in the middle of their day to attend today. I look forward to talking to some of you after this about what you thought. And we at the bank sure appreciate you, Eric, taking the time and presenting today this critical information. As I said, in a year where we all feel more concerned about our electronic profile than ever. So thank you, everybody, for attending. I'll let you get back to your day. Please take a minute to take the survey, and we appreciate your time.